Falklands War, how British forces captured Port Stanley just in time. Back in April 1982, Argentina suddenly launched an attack on the Falkland Islands, territory under British control, but long claimed by Argentina as the Malvinas. For years, Argentina had disputed Britain's hold on these remote islands, but mounting political troubles at home pushed the Argentine junta to make a bold move, hoping to rally national support. From a military perspective, many thought Britain wouldn't respond, given the enormous distance between the islands and the UK. But what happened next surprised everyone. Britain quickly assembled a powerful task force and sailed into the South Atlantic to reclaim the islands. This conflict would come to be remembered as Britain's last colonial war. Have you ever wondered how a small, isolated group of islands thousands of miles away could trigger such a fierce and unexpected showdown between two nations? The crucial clash, for Stanley, the Mount Kent encounter. By the end of May 1982, the British forces had firmly re-established their presence on the Falkland Islands, marking their first significant land victory at Goose Green. Yet, the pivotal confrontation in the conflict was destined to be the battle for Stanley, the island's capital. As twilight descended on May 29th, a heavily armed Argentine Special Forces patrol advanced stealthily along the banks of Moody Brook, nestled between the strategic peaks of Mount Longdon and Two Sisters. Passing through the western outposts of the Argentine defensive lines protecting Port Stanley, these seasoned soldiers paused to check their weapons and adjust their gear straps before cautiously proceeding along a narrow jeep track toward the lower slopes of Mount Kent. Rising 1,700 feet above sea level, Mount Kent dominated the surrounding terrain and held immense strategic importance for control of the Stanley area. Unlike the majority of Argentine troops, who were largely composed of young, inexperienced conscripts barely 18 years old, this patrol consisted of older, highly trained operatives distinguished by their black woolen caps, night vision goggles, and camouflaged faces. Their movement was channeled by the steep cliffs, rocky screes, and narrow crevices of the mountain's lower inclines, forcing the unit onto a single, exposed path, a tactical misstep born perhaps from necessity but fraught with danger. Suddenly, the stillness of the night shattered as brilliant parachute flares erupted overhead, bathing the slopes in a harsh, flickering light. The Argentines were caught off guard, and heavy British fire rained down upon them. Despite the onslaught, these were no green recruits, but professional soldiers who immediately mounted a fierce defense. The firefight raged through the night, marked by fierce determination and desperate resistance. However, as dawn approached, and with their ammunition running critically low, the Argentine unit was compelled to withdraw under heavy pressure. They retreated toward the relative safety of Stanley's defensive perimeter, forced to leave behind 8 comrades, 2 of whom had fallen in battle, while the rest were wounded or killed. This encounter at Mount Kent was a crucial prelude to the decisive battle for Stanley, illustrating both the tactical challenges and the fierce resolve on both sides during the Falklands War. Silent Shadows Before the Storm, the secret SAS operation before Goose Green. Unbeknownst to the Argentine forces on the fateful night spanning May 24th to 25th, just 2 days prior to the pivotal Battle of Goose Green, an elite group of soldiers from D Squadron, 22 SAS, had already stealthily inserted themselves onto the western slopes of Mount Kent. Their arrival came under the cloak of darkness, arriving by helicopter to initiate a critical reconnaissance and disruption mission. The only Argentine presence nearby was a helicopter squadron stationed precariously at the mountain's base. Several days earlier, this unit had been ruthlessly targeted and decimated by Harrier jets operating from the British aircraft carriers, Invincible and Hermes. The savage air assault left behind smoldering wreckage scattered across the makeshift airstrip. The few surviving Argentine troops had retreated hastily to Stanley, abandoning their destroyed machines and conceding control of the area. In the days that followed, additional SAS operatives infiltrated the mountain terrain with precision, gradually positioning themselves in strategic vantage points. From the summit of Mount Kent, Colonel Michael Rose, the SAS commander, held a commanding view, not just of the outer perimeter of Argentine defenses, but deep into the very streets of Stanley itself. His elevated position offered invaluable intelligence as he observed the slow and steady movements of enemy forces below. To the west, long, heavily burdened columns of the 3rd Battalion Parachute Regiment and 45 Commando Royal Marines began their arduous trek eastward. Laden with weapons, ammunition, and supplies, they maneuvered across the rugged landscape, navigating rocky outcrops known locally as stone runs, and slogging through the soggy peat bogs, a colloquial term borrowed from French slang for cross-country trekking. While the paratroopers referred to this as tabbing, the Royal Marines called it yumping, both describing the relentless, grueling march through unforgiving terrain. This silent build-up, hidden under the veil of night and the natural ruggedness of the Falklands, set the stage for the dramatic confrontations that would soon unfold, underscoring the blend of stealth, endurance, and tactical mastery that defined the SAS and their pivotal role in the conflict. The unyielding resolve amidst the fog of war. In the shadowy corridors of conflict, moments arise that test not only the courage of soldiers, but the very will of leadership. As dawn broke over Stanley, the British task force stood at a crossroads, burdened by unforeseen setbacks, yet driven by an ironclad resolve. Brigadier Julian Thompson, the task force commander, had envisioned a swift and strategic move to Mount Kent by helicopter, a plan carefully crafted to preserve the strength and stamina of his troops. However, fate intervened with ruthless precision. On May 26th, the devastating strike of an Argentine Exocet missile shattered this plan, sinking the container ship Atlantic Conveyor along with nearly all of the task force's vital heavy-lift Chinook helicopters, casting the forces into a state of uncertainty and forcing Thompson to reconsider the next steps. Amidst the tension, Thompson's instincts whispered caution. He knew that ordering an advance on foot after a grueling sea voyage was asking his men to carry a burden heavier than mere equipment. It was a test of endurance, spirit, and resolve. Yet, the distant voices from HQ at Northwood were relentless. They demanded momentum, urging him to press forward without delay. The message was clear. If Thompson hesitated, others would take command, ready to push the forces onward regardless of the cost. This pressure was not born from mere impatience, but from the fierce urgency of the political battlefield, where every decision echoed beyond the hills and trenches of the Falklands. At the heart of this urgency lay a deeper, more delicate fear: the specter of compromise. The British War Cabinet grappled with the possibility that the Argentine peace overtures might produce a settlement too generous to the adversary, one allowing Argentina to retain a foothold on the islands. Such an outcome was unthinkable to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, whose steely determination to prevent any semblance of reward for aggression fueled an unrelenting drive toward victory. To yield was to concede defeat, and defeat was a notion Thatcher and her government refused to entertain. Underneath this tension, the atmosphere at Northwood simmered with intensity. They were acutely aware that time was slipping away, that diplomatic support from allies, particularly the United States, was wavering, and that the window to strike decisively was narrow. The commanders were pressed not only by strategic necessity, but by the powerful currents of politics and public expectation. Thompson, standing at the fulcrum of these immense forces, faced a pivotal choice: to yield to the weight of caution or to advance into the unknown, driven by a resolve that would define the course of history. This moment, etched in the annals of war, reveals the profound interplay between leadership, sacrifice, and the indomitable spirit to prevail, a testament to the complex dance of decisions that shape the fate of nations. The Crucible of Command, a decisive moment in the Falklands conflict. In the shadowed dawn of May 26, 1982, the fate of the British task force hung precariously in the balance. Brigadier Julian Thompson, the resolute task force commander, found himself confronting an unforeseen and devastating blow, a blow that would ripple through the very core of the campaign. The container ship Atlantic Conveyor, a vital lifeline carrying the task force's precious heavy-lift Chinook helicopters, had been struck by an Argentine Exocet missile. In an instant, all but one of these colossal helicopters were lost to the depths of the South Atlantic, swallowed by the icy ocean waters. This catastrophic loss threatened to strip the British forces of their crucial mobility and logistic advantage, forcing Thompson to reconsider his carefully laid plans. At the heart of this turmoil was a gnawing sense of urgency and vulnerability. On the ground at Stanley, Thompson grappled with the challenge ahead. Was it wise to press forward on foot, burdening his exhausted troops after a grueling sea voyage? The arduous terrain of the Falklands, combined with the physical toll of the long journey, made an infantry advance feel like a daunting gamble. Yet command from Northwood was unequivocal and relentless. They pressed Thompson to proceed without delay, underscoring the imperative nature of swift action. Their message was clear. If Thompson hesitated, others stood ready to take his place. Beyond the immediate military considerations, an invisible yet potent tension simmered within the corridors of power. The British War Cabinet wrestled with a profound fear that diplomatic overtures from Argentina's leaders might yield a peace compromise. A compromise that risked legitimizing Argentine presence on the islands, a scenario Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was determined to prevent at all costs. For her, any concession would signal weakness, rewarding aggression and eroding British resolve. The political stakes were colossal, and the pressure emanating from London cascaded down through Northwood to the front lines. In this crucible of command, every decision was magnified, every moment laden with consequence. The window of opportunity was closing fast, and the task force had no choice but to seize it. Challenges of leading a war from afar, the harsh realities on the ground. Running a war from thousands of miles away is never easy. When a military campaign is controlled from a distant capital, the people making decisions can never fully grasp the realities faced by soldiers on the front lines. The commanders leading troops in the field have the clearest understanding of what's happening day to day. However, political leaders often have their own goals and timelines, pushing for quick results that may not match the on-the-ground situation. Balancing these political demands with military realities creates a constant tension in war planning. Imagine being a soldier forced to march through rough, open countryside with no protection from the weather. The conditions were brutal. One moment the sun would shine brightly, then heavy sleet and rain would drench the men. The wind rarely calmed, constantly blowing at strong speeds. Underfoot, the terrain was a nightmare. Soft, muddy peat bogs that swallowed boots, mixed with sharp, jagged stones that made every step painful. Some soldiers carried loads of up to 100 pounds, making the march even more exhausting. As night fell, the temperature plummeted below freezing, and rain driven by the wind cut into the faces of these already worn-out men. Marching in such conditions without air support meant they were completely exposed to the elements. There was no guarantee they would be able to dry off or resupply after a long day. Many were pushed beyond their physical limits, suffering from illnesses like diarrhea, caused by drinking unsafe water from the bogs, and other serious conditions such as trench foot and hypothermia. Problems first seen on the battlefields of World War I. These hardships highlight not only the physical strain of warfare, but also the human cost of fighting in such unforgiving environments, far removed from the comfortable rooms where war strategies are planned. 6. The bold assault on Top Marlo House, a turning point at Mount Kent. On the 30th of May, 2 Argentine UH-1H helicopters made a bold, low-altitude approach over the northern slopes of Mount Kent, skimming dangerously close to the ground. They flew past 3 British patrol positions before reaching Top Marlo House, a strategic location nestled in a valley approximately 5 miles westward. From this vantage point, the Argentines gained an advantageous view, allowing them to monitor British troop movements toward Stanley. Although the maneuver was audacious, it did not go unnoticed. A British observation post detected the helicopters early the next morning. At dawn, Captain Rodney Boswell, leading 18 Royal Marines from the Arctic and Mountain Warfare (CRA) unit, was inserted by a seeking helicopter. Boswell later recounted that the pilot pushed the aircraft to its limits, flying lower and faster than he had ever experienced during wartime. The helicopter touched down about 2 miles from Top Marlo House, nestled in a shallow valley hidden from direct sight of the Argentine position. The Argentines were taken completely by surprise when, without warning, 6 66mm rockets tore through the walls of Top Marlo House, followed swiftly by 2 additional rounds. An Argentine sentry responded by opening fire, injuring 1 Marine. However, he was almost immediately neutralized by a sniper's bullet from one of the Royal Marines. As the house began to burn, thick clouds of smoke billowed out, drifting across Argentine lines and providing the British forces with perfect cover. Taking advantage of the obscured visibility, the Marines intensified their barrage, maintaining relentless fire as they closed in on the enemy positions. After just a few minutes of fierce combat, the Argentines, overwhelmed and disoriented, surrendered by standing and discarding their weapons. The engagement resulted in 3 wounded British Marines, while the Argentine side suffered 5 fatalities and 12 were captured, 7 of whom were wounded. This swift and decisive action at Top Marlo House significantly disrupted Argentine surveillance capabilities and provided the British forces with a crucial foothold in the ongoing conflict. Won the Bite and Hold campaign, a strategic advance by Allied forces. The Bite and Hold campaign was a highly effective combat strategy, skillfully executed by the British forces under Biden's command. This approach wasn't simply about launching an attack, but focused on capturing and firmly holding key terrain features, such as mountains, ridgelines, or plateaus, and then quickly consolidating these positions by bringing up logistics and reinforcing with additional troops. This method was crucial and played a decisive role in establishing strong footholds for further advances. Notable examples of this tactic's success include the capture of strategic points like Mount Kent and Marlo House, which demonstrated how seizing and maintaining small but vital areas could turn the tide of the conflict. This approach also resulted in an attritional war that gradually wore down the Argentine forces. Argentina steadily lost control over critical positions, which severely undermined their intelligence-gathering capabilities, including their forward observation posts and patrol units. The loss of these assets not only impaired their ability to respond swiftly, but also had a demoralizing effect as news of setbacks filtered back to their rear lines. Conversely, this boosted British morale, keeping the troops engaged and motivated to continue pressing forward against the enemy. The key advantage of the bite and hold strategy was that it did not rely on a single, large-scale battle that risked heavy casualties and potential failure. Instead, by steadily advancing in smaller, controlled stages and holding captured ground firmly, the British forces were able to maintain continuous pressure on the enemy. This persistent, measured progression allowed them to inch closer to Argentina's main objective, Port Stanley, through a methodical and well-supported campaign. The combination of tactical precision, logistical support, and unwavering determination ultimately led to the campaign's success. 8. Race against time. The crucial arrival of British reinforcements in the South Atlantic. On the 30th of May, a vital wave of British reinforcements arrived in the South Atlantic, marking a pivotal moment in the unfolding conflict. The 5th Brigade, having set sail from Southampton on the 12th of May aboard the majestic QE2, reached the waters off Grytviken in South Georgia. From there, troops transferred to the Kenora, embarking on the challenging 700-mile journey toward the Falkland Islands. By the 1st of June, the brigade began disembarking at San Carlos Bay, where Task Force Commander Major General Jeremy Moore swiftly established his headquarters, orchestrating operations with meticulous precision. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Thompson, now back under the command of the 3rd Brigade, moved his command center to Teal Inlet. The political stakes soared higher as intense pressure from London, especially from Defense Secretary John Knott, urged Moore to advance quickly and capture Stanley. The atmosphere was charged with urgency, a complex mix of military necessity and political expectations. Tensions escalated further when on the 31st of May, U.S. President Ronald Reagan personally contacted Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, expressing concern about the growing wave of anti-British sentiment sweeping across Latin America. This call hinted at a waning American support for the British campaign, signaling that diplomatic backing might soon falter. Adding to the mounting pressure, Admiral Woodward reminded his land commanders that his naval forces could only maintain their positions until mid-June at the latest. The window for decisive action was rapidly closing. The entire operation had transformed into a desperate race against time, where every decision, every movement carried the weight of urgency, uncertainty, and the hope of victory. The fiery ordeal at Bluff Cove, a harrowing chapter of the Falklands conflict. In the unforgiving theater of war, moments of sheer terror and courage often unfold with little warning, etching unforgettable marks on history. Between May 31st and June 8, 1982, the Falklands conflict saw a desperate and tense operation as elements of the British 3rd and 5th Brigades moved to encircle enemy positions. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and danger. Helicopters silently lifted the brave Stanley 42 Commando to Mount Kent, while 2 Para was transported to Bluff Cove. Meanwhile, 2 companies of Scots Guards and Welsh Guards were ferried in landing ship, tanks, LSLs, to Bluff Cove and Fitzroy, each soldier stepping closer into the jaws of uncertainty. Yet, fate and misfortune converged in a tragic dance. Due to a combination of misjudgments and sheer bad luck, 2 companies of Welsh Guards remained aboard the Sir Galahad as it lay anchored off Fitzroy for over 5 hours, fully exposed to the vigilant gaze of Argentine forces stationed just 10 miles away at Mount Harriet. As the afternoon sun dipped low on June 8th, the roar of Argentine skyhawks shattered the uneasy calm. In a devastating assault, 5 jets unleashed bombs on the ships below. The Sir Tristram was struck. 1 bomb pierced through without exploding, but another detonated fiercely on the vehicle deck. However, it was Sir Galahad that bore the brunt of this savage attack. 3 bombs crashed into her hull, igniting massive fireballs that swallowed the decks in flames and smoke. The scene became a fiery crucible of agony and heroism. This single event claimed 46 lives and left more than 150 wounded, many gravely burned. Surgeon Commander Rick Jolly's diary from that night paints a haunting picture of the makeshift hospital at Ajax Bay. As night fell, the arrival of helicopter casualties grew relentless, each load seeming worse than the last. The triage area overflowed, stretcher-borne soldiers poured through the doors, the air thick with pain, fear, and the desperate fight for survival. More than 120 men were victims of the bombing, their suffering a solemn testament to the brutal realities of war. This fiery ordeal at Bluff Cove remains etched in memory not only for its tragic toll, but for the unyielding spirit of those who faced hellfire and refused to break. 10. The perils of deploying unseasoned forces. Lessons from Bluff Cove. In the crucible of warfare, the difference between victory and disaster often hinges on preparation and experience. The tragic events at Bluff Cove stand as a stark reminder of what can go wrong when an unseasoned military unit is thrust into a complex operation without adequate training or readiness. Imagine a brigade, hastily assembled from disparate units, Scots Guards, Welsh Guards, and the Gurkhas. Drawn from ceremonial duties and ad hoc formations, suddenly tasked with a demanding combat mission far beyond their usual scope. This was 5 Brigade, a force lacking the cohesive training and battlefield conditioning necessary to face the intense challenges ahead. The Welsh Guards, for example, were fresh from ceremonial parades in London, a world apart from the harsh realities of frontline conflict. Without the rigorous, environment-specific preparation that elite units such as the Parachute Regiment and Royal Marines underwent, their attempt to march into hostile territory was ill-fated from the start. Consequently, much of their movement relied on sea transport, a vulnerability magnified by the absence of air superiority. This exposed them to devastating Argentine air attacks, resulting in heavy casualties and operational setbacks. Beyond the immediate tactical failures, British military analysts later suggested that the Bluff Cove disaster inadvertently diverted Argentine focus toward the southwestern approaches to Stanley. However, evidence supporting this strategic benefit remains scant. The episode serves as a haunting lesson on the critical importance of thorough training, unified command, and environmental readiness before deploying troops into high-risk operations. Reminders that resonate well beyond the Falklands conflict. Defending the Falklands, the Argentine stand on June 10, 1982. By the 10th of June 1982, the situation on the Falkland Islands had reached a tense and crucial point. Argentine forces under General Menendez had settled into a strong defensive stance, preparing for a British attack that was expected any day. The island's rugged landscape, combined with the careful positioning of troops and weapons, made the defense a challenging puzzle for both sides. Along the coastline near Port Stanley, the capital of the Falklands, 3 Argentine regiments, the 25th, 6th, and 3rd, were stationed to guard against any direct amphibious assault. This meant they were ready to confront British forces if they attempted to land troops from the sea, which was the most straightforward way to approach Port Stanley. Meanwhile, inland, the Argentine 7th Regiment had dug in on Longdon Hill, facing west toward the expected British approach. They were supported by a special group of Argentine Marines equipped with heavy machine guns, making their position even tougher to crack. To the south of Longdon, other Argentine troops were defending key high points like Mount Tumbledown and Mount Harriet. These hills were important because they overlooked routes toward Port Stanley, and controlling them meant controlling the battlefield. The Argentines had spent time fortifying these positions with trenches, bunkers, and hidden machine gun nests, making the terrain a defensive fortress. One of the biggest challenges for the British was the extensive use of mines. Before the fighting really got underway, the Argentines had laid more than 30,000 mines across the islands. These were placed along all the likely paths the British might take and at potential landing spots. Mines are hidden explosives buried just under the ground, designed to stop or slow down an enemy by causing injuries or destroying vehicles. The sheer number of mines made any movement dangerous and slowed down British advances, forcing them to proceed carefully. While the Argentine Air Force had been mostly grounded by British attacks in the air, artillery, the big guns on the ground, remained a serious threat. Menendez had over 40 105mm artillery guns and 3 bigger 155mm guns scattered around Port Stanley, often hidden close to local homes. The Argentine soldiers knew the British would hesitate to fire back in these areas for fear of hitting civilians, giving the Argentines a safe advantage to keep up heavy bombardments. After the war, Menendez was criticized, especially by the British, for keeping his troops static and not being more aggressive. Some argued that the Argentine forces should have patrolled more actively or counterattacked the British early on, when they were still landing on the beaches. They wondered why the Argentines didn't send stronger reinforcements to key places like Goose Green or Darwin. However, it's important to understand the reality Menendez faced. The Argentine troops were mostly young conscripts, many only 18 or 19 years old, with limited training and experience. Unlike highly trained professional soldiers from European armies or the United States, these young men were not prepared for complex mobile warfare. Menendez knew that if he tried to send these lightly trained soldiers out in the open against the highly skilled British forces, they would likely be cut down in detail, meaning defeated piece by piece before they could regroup. Therefore, Menendez's decision to hold a defensive line using the natural strength of the terrain and fortifications was the most practical and intelligent strategy available to him. He focused on minimizing the weaknesses of his troops by digging them in and making sure they were well armed and prepared to hold their ground, rather than maneuvering in risky open battle. Despite supply problems and poor morale, many frontline soldiers resented their commanders and support units, The harsh conditions and shared hardships in the trenches brought the young soldiers closer together. Over time, unit cohesion actually improved. By June 10th, many Argentine conscripts were in reasonable physical shape and ready for the fight ahead, even though their situation was uncomfortable and dangerous. On the evening of June 10th, the British forces were ready to launch their attack, aiming to take control of the key positions from north to south. The battle was about to enter one of its most intense and dramatic phases, starting with the attack on Mount Longdon, a natural fortress and the linchpin in the Argentine defensive line. 12 assault on Two Sisters Ridge, the fierce battle for control. To the south of Mount Longdon, the Royal Marines from X, Y, and Z companies of 45 Commando had crossed the Merle River roughly 30 minutes after the 3rd Parachute Regiment had initiated their advance. Their objective was Two Sisters Ridge, a formidable position composed of western and eastern peaks. This ridge was heavily fortified, with approximately 300 Argentine soldiers entrenched, supported by mortars and heavy machine guns, making it a highly defensible location. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Whitehead, commanding the Marines, planned for X Company to launch a direct frontal assault on the western peak, designed to fix the defenders' attention, while Y and Z companies would maneuver from the north to strike the enemy's right flank. However, X Company's progress lagged significantly behind schedule. Instead of the anticipated 3 hours, it took them 6 hours to reach their designated positions. Upon finally ascending the western slopes of Two Sisters, X Company encountered intense machine gun fire from Argentine forces. Lacking artillery support and finding their mortar bombardments largely ineffective, the Marines resorted to firing anti-tank missiles at the enemy. Navigating through a complex terrain scattered with boulders, they pressed forward to close in on the defensive positions. Meanwhile, Y and Z companies had reached the northern slopes, but were also pinned down by heavy 5-caliber machine gun fire. Mortar shells began to fall dangerously close behind them, effectively trapping the troops in a deadly crossfire. Recognizing their precarious situation, Z Company surged forward with a fierce battle cry. "Zulu! Zulu!" charging uphill with determination. Y Company quickly joined the aggressive assault, engaging the enemy at close quarters with bayonets. The sudden and intense offensive caused panic among the Argentine defenders, resulting in approximately 250 soldiers retreating toward Tumbledown Hill. The Argentines suffered significant casualties, with 10 killed and 54 wounded during this fierce confrontation. 13. The multi-pronged assault at Mount Harriet and the challenges faced by the British Brigade. About 1.5 miles south of Two Sisters lies Mount Harriet, a strategic vantage point from which the Argentine forces could control the southwestern approach to Port Stanley. Lieutenant Colonel Nick Vow, commanding officer of 42 Commando, decided to launch a diversionary attack due west with J Company, while simultaneously sending K and L companies on an outflanking maneuver across heavily mined terrain to the southeast. The objective of J Company's diversionary assault was to draw Argentine attention and create an opening for the other two companies to catch the enemy by surprise. This element of surprise was further enhanced by the ongoing battle at Mount Longdon. Many Argentine troops were focused on that fight, allowing British forces to quietly close in on Mount Harriet. When the Royal Marine commanders suddenly burst through the rocky terrain, the Argentine defenders were caught off guard, panicked, and offered only weak resistance before retreating. Instead of fleeing east toward the safety of Fort Stanley, the Argentines ran westward, only to be trapped in a canyon at the western end of Mount Harriet. From this position, they were pinned down by fire from Mount Challenger and the Marine Fire Base. The British captured 250 prisoners and discovered 10 more Argentine dead among the rocks. Remarkably, 42 commandos suffered just 11 casualties, including 1 fatality. The next phase of the assault, planned by Commander Moore to capture Tumbledown and Wireless Ridge on the night of June 12, 13, was delayed by 24 hours at the request of Brigadier Tony Wilson, leader of 5 Brigade. He wanted to give his officers more time for detailed reconnaissance of their objectives. Moore agreed, recognizing that the intense fighting on June 11th and 12 had caused major logistical and fire support challenges that needed time to be resolved. On the evening of June 14th, 3 battalions moved to resume the offensive. When Moore and Thompson met to coordinate, they had to decide how to best deploy their forces. They had 2 brigades, 3 Commando Brigade, which was experienced in combat, and 5 Brigade, which included the Scots Guards and Welsh Guards. These Guards battalions had mainly been on ceremonial duties and were not fully trained for this type of operation. However, operational decisions were influenced not only by military strategy, but also by political considerations within the military, ensuring every battalion had a chance to engage the enemy. Furthermore, the Guards units still had considerable fighting capability, while the commandos and paratroopers were exhausted from the difficult terrain and continuous fighting in East Falkland. Ultimately, the final battles around Stanley were a joint effort between the 2 brigades, reflecting the cohesive fighting spirit that had characterized the division since their initial landings at San Carlos and Fitzroy. 14. The crucial night assault on Tumbledown, a battle of resolve and precision. In the dark, biting cold of the Falklands night, an operation unfolded that would test the very limits of courage, discipline, and strategy. The mission was clear yet daunting: seize control of Tumbledown Mountain, a rugged, rocky ridge that stood as the cornerstone of Argentina's defense around Port Stanley. This ridge was no ordinary obstacle. It was a natural fortress, stretching miles westward, with sheer cliffs guarding its northern edge, a daunting barrier that forced attackers to approach from the southwest. The fate of the entire campaign hinged on this objective. Capture Tumbledown, and the rest of the enemy's defenses would unravel like a carefully constructed puzzle falling apart. The 5th Infantry Brigade, led by the determined 2nd Scots Guards, spearheaded the assault. These elite soldiers were tasked with overcoming the fierce resistance of the Argentine 5th Marines. Seasoned veterans, well entrenched and backed by devastating artillery, positioned just 5 miles away. Behind them, the 1st and 7th Gurkhas prepared to advance through Mount William, a strategic spur stretching southeast from Tumbledown, ready to exploit any breach made by the Scots Guards. As the night pressed in, the environment itself conspired against the attackers. Howling winds, near-freezing temperatures, and pitch-black darkness. Initial progress came as the G Company stealthily took the western end of the ridge without detection, passing the torch to Major John Kisley's left flank company. However, halfway along, they met the full brunt of Argentine defensive fire. Trapped under a merciless hail of bullets and shells, movement became impossible. Attempts to summon artillery support faltered in the chaotic conditions. The vital forward observer was missing, and artillery fire, when it finally arrived, was a faint and ineffective plop rather than the thunderous salvo they desperately needed. Faced with this dire situation, Kisley's leadership shone through. Refusing to be stalled, He rallied his men to improvise, gathering rocket launchers and machine guns to provide their own firepower. After a tense 3-hour stalemate, the tide turned. Steadily, the Scots Guards clawed their way forward, pushing through the series of deceptive crests that marked the ridge. Each advance reclaimed territory, forced enemy withdrawals, and secured prisoners, until finally Kisley and a handful of 6 men reached the highest rocky ledge overlooking the glowing streetlights of Port Stanley below. The cost was steep, but the victory decisive. After 11 grueling hours, the Scots Guards had wrested Tumblin down from the grasp of the battle-hardened 5th Marines, who suffered significant casualties and prisoners taken. The fierce professionalism displayed by both sides reflected the brutal reality of warfare. This was a clash of equals, a testament to training, determination, and the will to prevail. This battle was not merely a fight for ground, but a demonstration of how discipline and resolve can overcome even the most daunting of challenges. The capture of Tumbledown marked a turning point, the keystone in the arch leading to the eventual liberation of Port Stanley and the Falklands. 15. The relentless advance on Wireless Ridge, a testament to courage and firepower. In the unfolding drama of the Falklands conflict, one chapter stands out as a profound display of strategic brilliance and unyielding resolve: the British advance on Wireless Ridge. Under the vigilant command of Lieutenant Colonel David Chandler, the seasoned paratroopers of 2nd Battalion, Parachute Regiment, Tela Para, moved with deliberate precision across terrain that stretched east to west, just a mile north of the fiercely contested Tumbledown Hill. The Argentine forces entrenched here, elements of the 7th Regiment, were hardened by previous clashes, including survivors from the brutal Mount Longdon engagement, numbering about 500 determined defenders. As twilight gave way to the rising challenge of night operations, the British forces orchestrated a complex assault designed to overwhelm and disorient. Behind the scenes, diversionary tactics played their part. Royal Marine Commandos deployed from rigid raiders to draw enemy attention, while elite SAS-DG squadrons executed a daring maneuver, crossing the treacherous Hen Water Inlet. These special forces came under intense fire from both the ridge's eastern slopes and the enemy's concentrated anti-aircraft defenses. Yet their resilience allowed them to evade near disaster, sustaining minimal casualties in a near-miraculous escape. This initial pressure paved the way for the main assault, an overwhelming display of coordinated firepower, unparalleled in the campaign. British artillery rained down a relentless barrage, 6,000 rounds of 105mm shells from field guns, accompanied by heavy naval bombardments from nearby frigates, all targeting the enemy's eastern defenses. Armored support from Scorpion and Scimitar light tanks sustained a continuous hail of cannon and machine gun fire, softening the Argentine positions and shattering their morale. Mortar teams and machine gun platoons maintained a ceaseless curtain of suppressive fire, pushing the defenders into retreat. In the face of this relentless onslaught, the Argentine resistance faltered. By the time 2nd Para's D Company reached the summit, opposition had all but dissolved, leaving behind a grim testament to the ferocity of the battle. Nearly 100 enemy dead and dozens more captured. The remainder fled in daylight, retreating along the track toward Stanley, signaling a decisive turning point in the struggle for control of the Falklands' strategic heights. 16. The final hours of the Falklands conflict, a story of defeat and loneliness. As the battle for the Falklands reached its climax, the British forces found the Argentine defenders beginning to collapse. The British troops chased the retreating Argentines across Wireless Ridge, while a small, highly trained SAS team landed near Stanley Harbor. This team called in artillery fire that pushed the Argentines further away toward the southwest. Meanwhile, British soldiers moved up Mount William, only to find that the Argentine soldiers had already abandoned their positions. In a bold move, 4 British commanders were flown by helicopter to Sapper Hill, the last defensible position before Stanley, and took control without any resistance. For the Argentine commander, General Menendez, the night had been long and filled with hope and disappointment. Early on, he thought his forces had successfully pushed back an armored attack from the southwest, as well as an amphibious assault from the northeast. But as dawn broke, the harsh truth became clear. Despite having more troops and firepower, he could not hold back the British. Menendez struggled to accept defeat. This is something many military leaders face when their forces are on the brink of being overwhelmed. It's hard to come to terms with losing, especially when everyone is watching. Throughout the conflict, Menendez stayed in contact with his president, Galtieri, seeking instructions and reassurance. However, Galtieri refused to promise that surrendering would be seen as an honorable option. By the morning of June 14th, 1982, Menendez felt completely alone and abandoned. Without support from above, his loyalty shifted solely to his exhausted soldiers who had fought hard but could no longer hold their ground. Around 11 a.m., during a radio conversation with Galtieri, Menendez broke down, expressing his despair. He explained that his troops had done all they could, but had no more options left. No space, no resources, and no hope for reinforcements. After feeling betrayed by his president, Menendez turned to a British officer speaking Spanish and agreed to negotiate surrender terms. By late evening, after initial talks, the formal surrender was signed, bringing an end to the conflict in the Falklands. This moment marked not just a military defeat, but a deeply human story of loneliness, tough decisions, and the heavy cost of war. During the Falklands campaign, it was absolutely vital that the British gave proper care and attention to their logistics. They were operating nearly 8,000 miles away in the South Atlantic, and a great deal depended on how effectively they could transport the necessary supplies from Britain to the Falkland Islands. Once on the islands, there was the additional challenge of moving those resources from the beachhead to where they were urgently needed. Despite these immense challenges, there is no evidence to suggest that the British suffered any major logistical breakdown by mid-June. The real threat lay in the sustainability of the fleet itself. Admiral Sandy Woodward clearly documented the harsh reality of his situation. The ships were literally being battered and worn down by the brutal South Atlantic winter. The dangerous combination of ice and salt water was severely degrading communication systems and impairing the early warning capabilities crucial for the operation's success. Admiral Woodward understood that the moment would soon arrive when he would have to admit defeat and order his fleet back to Ascension Island, a warmer region of the ocean, simply because his ships could no longer endure the punishing conditions. It was estimated that they could remain on station for no more than another 5 or 6 days at best. Therefore, the success of the campaign, particularly in terms of logistics and naval support, was secured only at the 11th hour, in the nick of time. If you found this analysis insightful, please don't forget to like and follow for more in-depth content like this.